"Mom, please don't come over today. We just had the house deep cleaned and I don't want it smelling like old food." Those words flashed onto my phone screen at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning, while I was already on the 4 train in New York City, heading uptown towards the Bronx. In my hands, I held the same plastic Tupperware with faded cartoon rabbit drawings that I'd used for years to pack Jessica's lunches when she was little. Inside was a lentil and sausage stew that I had started cooking at 6 in the morning, slowly stirring the wooden spoon while thinking about how much my grandchildren would love it. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. I read the text 3 times, hoping the words would change, that my eyes had betrayed me, that it was some kind of autocorrect error. But no, there it was, with the cold finality of an eviction notice. My own daughter, forbidding me from entering her home because my presence made it dirty. I didn't know what hurt more, the casualness with which she dismissed me, or the fact that she didn't even bother to invent a more elaborate excuse. I was simply a problem, an obstacle, a stain on her perfectly planned day. My legs began to tremble in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't nervousness. It was as if my entire body had been hit by an electric shock. I had to get off at the next stop, 59th Street, and sit on one of those cold metal benches that are always freezing, no matter the season. People rushed past me with the typical haste of a New York morning. Executives in flawless suits talking on their phones about important meetings, students with heavy backpacks running to their classes, young mothers pushing strollers while checking their phones. They all had a place to go, someone waiting for them, a purpose that moved them. I, on the other hand, had become an inconvenience to the one person who should have valued my presence most. The Tupperware was still warm in my hands, and the aroma of the stew seeped from the edges of the poorly sealed lid. It was the same smell that filled our small kitchen on a side street in Jackson Heights when Jessica was a child, when she'd come home from school with her cheeks flushed from the cold and wrap her arms around my waist while I cooked. "It smells like home, Mom," she would say then, burying her nose in my worn-out apron. Now that same smell, the scent of my love turned into food, was a nuisance, a contamination to be avoided. I sat there for almost an hour, watching trains carry passengers to destinations I no longer had. The station filled and emptied in regular waves, but I remained motionless, clinging to a container of lentils that was slowly growing cold, just like my heart. I remembered the day Jessica taught me how to text, 3 years ago. "This way we can talk more often, Mom," she had said with that smile she inherited from me, but which now seemed reserved for everyone else. She patiently explained how to send messages, use emojis, and attach photos. "It's really easy, you'll see. You'll love it," she insisted, as I tried to memorize each step. What an irony that the very technology meant to bring us closer was now the chosen medium to keep me away. I read the text again, and this time I noticed a detail I had missed before. She had sent it exactly 6 minutes after I had written to her. "On my way, sweetie. Bringing you some yummy food." That meant she had seen my message, quickly calculated how to prevent my visit, and found the most hurtful excuse possible. The subway continued to rumble around me, indifferent to my small, personal tragedy. The station announcements echoed from the speakers with that metallic voice I knew by heart, after years of using public transport to get to Jessica's house. Next stop, 161st Street Yankee Stadium. That was my usual stop to visit her, the one I had memorized like a prayer. When I finally stood up from the bench, my legs had regained their stability, but something deeper had broken. I walked slowly towards the exit, carrying not just the Tupperware of stew, but also the weight of a terrible realization. To my daughter, I had become someone to be protected from. Outside, the October sun cast that golden light over the city that I had always found beautiful. But that day, even the beauty felt like a mockery. I headed for the bus stop that would take me back to my apartment in Jackson Heights, that small 2-bedroom space where I had raised Jessica and where I now lived alone, surrounded by memories that hurt a little more each day. During the ride back, I looked out the window at the buildings I knew by heart, the streets I had walked 1,000 times taking Jessica to the park, to the doctor, to get ice cream on Sundays. Every corner held a story. Every square held a memory of when it was the two of us against the world, when my love was enough to fill all the voids of her childhood. That night, when I finally got home, I heated the stew and ate it alone, sitting at my small kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light I had been meaning to change for months. Every spoonful tasted of the sadness of cooking for someone who no longer wants your cooking. And as I ate, a terrible idea began to form in my mind. Maybe all the love I had given for 66 years had been in vain. Maybe I had completely misunderstood the rules of the game, and now it was too late to learn how to play differently. Jessica was born on March 15, 1987, at Mount Sinai Hospital after 26 hours of labor. She weighed 7 pounds and had the strongest lungs in the entire maternity ward. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, wrapped in one of those faded pink hospital blankets, I thought my life finally had meaning. Her father, Robert, stayed with me for exactly 3 months and 11 days. Not because I was keeping count, but because the day he left was my 32nd birthday. He woke me up that morning saying he had found a job in Chicago, that he needed a fresh start, that being a father wasn't for him. He packed his things into 2 suitcases and left without even holding Jessica one last time. I was left alone in our small apartment with a 3-month-old baby, $400 in my bank account, and a heart that didn't know if it was beating from fear or determination. That same afternoon, while Jessica slept in her second-hand crib, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until I had no tears left. Then I got up, washed my face with cold water, and made a decision. I was going to be the best mother in the world, no matter what it took. The first few years were a blur of cleaning jobs, sleepless nights, and hands chapped by chemical products. I cleaned offices in the early morning while Jessica slept, leaving her with Mrs. Davis, my neighbor from the 5th floor, who only charged me $20 a week because she understood what it was like to be alone. Then I would rush home, give my daughter breakfast, take her to daycare, and go clean private homes until 6 in the evening. My hands always smelled of bleach and detergent, no matter how much I washed them. Jessica, when she was little, used to hold them and kiss them, telling me they had a clean smell. Those words gave me the strength to carry on when my joints ached so much I could barely hold a mop. I vividly remember the day Jessica turned 5. I had saved for months to buy her a pink bicycle with training wheels that I had seen in the window of a toy store near Herald Square. The saleswoman looked at me with pity as I paid with quarters and crumpled $5 bills. "For your granddaughter, right?" she asked. "For my daughter," I replied with pride. That afternoon, in a small park near our home, I taught her how to ride. She fell 7 times, but each time she got up laughing, with scraped knees and eyes shining with excitement. "Look, Mom, I can almost do it myself," she would yell as she pedaled with trembling hands gripping the handlebars. I ran behind her, panting, my hands outstretched in case she fell, feeling like the richest woman in the world. When Jessica was 8, she told me she wanted to learn piano. I was earning $600 a month cleaning houses, and the lessons cost $50 each. I crunched numbers on paper napkins for a whole week, calculating expenses, eliminating any small luxury from my life. I stopped buying coffee from the corner deli, started sewing my own dresses with fabric I found at thrift stores, and began working Saturdays cleaning a restaurant downtown. For 4 years, Jessica had piano lessons every Thursday at 5 o'clock. I would sit in the hallway of the music school, on a hard plastic chair, listening to the scales and melodies coming from room number 3. Sometimes I would fall asleep there, exhausted from a week's work, and wake up to the sound of the notes from Fur-Elise that Jessica played with increasingly confident fingers. I never complained. Not when my back ached from carrying boxes of cleaning supplies, nor when I had to get up at 4 in the morning to get to the downtown offices on time. I saw Jessica's eyes light up every time she mastered a new piece, and that was worth every extra hour of work, every dollar saved, every silent sacrifice. When she graduated from high school with excellent grades, Jessica hugged me at the school gates and whispered in my ear, "Thanks for everything, Mom. When I'm older, I'm going to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." Those words were etched into my heart like a sacred promise. As the reward for all the years of effort and absolute devotion, I helped her pay for college, selling the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me and working double shifts on weekends. When she graduated from NYU with honors in advertising and marketing, I was in the front row of the auditorium, applauding until my hands hurt, with tears of pride streaming down my cheeks. 2 years later, when she landed her first job at an agency in Manhattan, Jessica called me, crying with joy. "I did it, Mom. I finally have a real job." I helped her move, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs in a walk-up, organizing her new apartment as if it were a treasure, buying her first refrigerator with my savings because it was important to start off right. But something changed when Jessica married Alex, an engineer with an air of superiority who looked at her like she was a trophy and treated me like a piece of old furniture that had to be tolerated. The visits became less frequent, the conversations shorter, the smiles more forced. When my grandchildren, Charlie and Sophia, were born, I thought I would be needed again. I became the invisible nanny, the one who arrived at 6 in the morning and left after 9 at night, without pay, without breaks, without recognition. For 5 full years, my life revolved around Charlie and Sophia's schedules. I woke up every day at 5:30, made my coffee in silence so as not to wake the neighbors, and took the first subway train to Scarsdale, the affluent suburb where Jessica had moved after getting married. The house was enormous, with a private yard and 3 cars in the driveway. But I always entered through the back door, as if I were part of the domestic staff. Alex never greeted me directly. When we crossed paths in the kitchen while he was making his expensive pod coffee, he would speak to me through Jessica. "Tell your mother the kids can't have sugar before 10, or ask her if she can stay later because we have a work dinner." As if I were invisible, as if I had no ears or voice of my own. Jessica seemed not to notice these slights, or perhaps she had simply decided to ignore them. When I would mention, very delicately, that Alex treated me like an employee, she would sigh and say, "Mom, you know how he is. Don't take it personally. He's just really stressed with work." There was always an excuse to justify his coldness, always a reason why I should understand and forgive. The children became my only refuge in that house that never made me feel welcome. Charlie, with his 4-year-old gap-toothed smile, would run to me every morning yelling, "Grandma Carol," and cling to my legs like I was a tree. Sophia, smaller and shy, would curl up on my lap during her afternoon naps, sucking her thumb while I sang her the same lullabies I had sung to her mother decades ago. I prepared their breakfast with the same dedication I had put into Jessica's meals when she was little. I cut their toast into star shapes, made smiley faces with jam, and invented stories about the cereal dancing in the milk. Charlie always wanted me to tell him the story of the grandma who cooked clouds, a tale I improvised one rainy day that became our morning ritual. But no matter how much love I put into every gesture, no matter how much devotion I showed day after day, I was still treated like an extension of the house, like a useful but disposable appliance. Jessica would get home from work at 7 in the evening, find me in the kitchen preparing the children's dinner, and her greeting was always the same. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay? Did they eat?" She never asked how my day had been, if my back hurt after 10 hours of carrying children, if I needed anything. One December afternoon, while I was bathing Sophia in the duck-shaped tub I had bought myself because the original one was too big for a 2-year-old, I overheard Jessica on the phone with a friend in the hallway. "You have no idea how convenient it is having my mom as a nanny," she said, laughing. "She costs me nothing. She's available whenever I need her, and the kids adore her. It's like having free 24/7 domestic service." Free domestic service. Those words stabbed me in the chest. I froze, my soapy hands holding Sophia in the warm water as I processed that my own daughter saw me in the exact same way as her husband, as free labor. That night, when I returned to my apartment on the last train, I sat in my worn-out armchair and cried like I hadn't cried since the day Robert left me. But these tears were different. I wasn't crying out of sadness, but from a dull rage that was beginning to build in my stomach. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel resentment toward my daughter. Birthdays became my personal thermometer for measuring how invisible I had become. Last year, when I turned 65, I spent the entire day waiting for a call that never came. I had bought a small vanilla cake from the bakery in my neighborhood, the same one where I used to buy treats for Jessica's birthdays when she was a little girl. I placed it on my kitchen table and waited. At 10 in the morning, I thought, she'll definitely call after work. At 3 in the afternoon, she must be busy with the kids. At 8 at night, maybe she forgot, but she'll remember before she goes to bed. At 11, I blew out the candles without making a wish, because I had already lost hope that it would come true. The next day, Jessica sent me a text message. "Happy belated birthday, Mom. Yesterday was a crazy day. I'll make it up to you soon." A heart emoji. That was all the compensation I received for 65 years of life. But the moment that truly opened my eyes was when Charlie came down with pneumonia last winter. Jessica called me at 5 in the morning, hysterical. "Mom, I need you to come now. Charlie has a high fever and we don't know what to do." I was there in less than an hour, still in my pajamas, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. For a full week, I did not leave that house. I slept on the living room sofa, took turns with Jessica giving Charlie his medicine every 4 hours, placed cool cloths on his forehead when the fever spiked, and read him stories in a soft voice so he could sleep. Alex disappeared during those days, claiming he couldn't get sick because he had important meetings. When Charlie finally recovered and was back to running around the house with his usual energy, I thought that maybe this moment of crisis had helped Jessica appreciate everything I did for her family. I was wrong. The day the pediatrician said the boy was completely fine, Jessica hugged me and said, "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I would have done without you." But 2 days later, when I asked if I could take a weekend off because I felt exhausted, she responded with annoyance, "Seriously, Mom? Right now when we have that important wedding on Saturday." That night, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror of my apartment, I saw a 66-year-old woman who had lost her identity somewhere along the way. I was no longer Carol, the woman who had raised a daughter alone, who had worked for decades to give her everything she needed. Now I was just Grandma, the nanny, the one who's always available. And the most painful part of it all was realizing that Jessica had learned to use my unconditional love as a weapon against me. She knew I would never say no, that I would always be there when she needed me, that my single mother guilt would make me accept any treatment just to keep her in my life. The morning of my 66th birthday dawned like any other gray October Tuesday. I woke up at 6, as always, to the sound of the alarm clock I had used for the last 20 years. I made my coffee, black, no sugar, and sat at the small kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast alone for the past 5 years, ever since Jessica moved to Scarsdale. I had marked the date on the wall calendar with a red circle as if it were an important doctor's appointment. Not because I expected a grand celebration, but because I needed to remind myself that I still existed, that I had made it another year around the sun despite everything. At 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed. My heart leaped with hope. It was an automated text from the bank, reminding me that my Social Security check had been deposited. I kept checking the screen every 5 minutes for the next 2 hours, hoping to see Jessica's name appear, or maybe a call from Charlie with his little voice asking when I was coming to see them. By noon, I decided to go out and buy a cake. Not a big one, just a single-serving slice from Mrs. Peterson's bakery on the corner of my block. I chose a vanilla one with frosting, the same kind I had bought for all of Jessica's birthdays when we lived together in our small apartment. "Celebrating something special?" Mrs. Peterson asked as she wrapped the cake slice in pink cellophane. "My birthday," I answered, trying to make my voice sound cheerful. "Congratulations! Is the family coming to visit?" She continued with that kind curiosity of older people who understand the importance of special occasions. "I suppose so," I lied, paying the $4.50 for my small celebration. I went back home and placed the cake on the table, next to a paper napkin and a fork. I searched in the kitchen drawer until I found a solitary candle, one of those left over from previous birthdays, half melted but still functional. I stuck it in the center of the cake and sat down to wait. I waited for 2 hours, looking at the unlit candle, imagining that at any moment the doorbell would ring and Jessica, Alex, and the kids would appear with balloons and gifts, apologizing for being late and filling my small apartment with laughter and hugs. But the doorbell never rang. At 3 in the afternoon, I lit the candle and sang happy birthday to myself in a low voice, almost a whisper, because I was embarrassed that the neighbors might hear me. I closed my eyes to make a wish, but my mind went blank. I didn't know what to wish for, because the only thing I wanted was something you can't ask for my daughter to love me the same way I loved her. I blew out the candle and ate the cake in silence, each bite tasting of loneliness. The frosting, which had always been my favorite part, tasted like cardboard. I saved half of it in the fridge, thinking that maybe it would taste better the next day, though I knew that was a lie. That night, as I watched TV in my worn-out armchair, I heard voices in the hallway. It was the family from the next-door apartment, celebrating their 80-year-old grandmother's birthday. Through the thin walls of the building, I could hear the grandchildren's laughter, the clinking of plates, the cheerful music that accompanied their celebration. I stayed awake late, not from insomnia, but because those sounds of family happiness made me feel less alone. The next day, when I arrived at Jessica's house to watch the kids, Charlie ran towards me as usual, but before I could pick him up, Jessica yelled from the kitchen, "Charlie, don't run! We just mopped!" The boy stopped in his tracks, confused, looking at me with those big eyes that so resembled his mother's when she was little. "Hi, Mom." Jessica greeted me without looking up from the phone she was scrolling through while drinking her morning coffee. She was wearing a new blouse, the kind that costs more than I spend on food in a month, and her nails were freshly manicured with a polish that shone under the kitchen light. I waited. I waited for her to remember, to apologize, to say something about the day before. But nothing. She simply handed me a handwritten list of the kids' activities. Charlie has a dentist appointment at 4. Sophia needs her cough medicine every 6 hours. Oh, and the cleaning lady is coming at 2, so keep them out of the living room. The cleaning lady. A woman who was paid to do what I did for free every day. Keep that house running. The difference was that she received respect, a salary, and went home at the end of the day with her dignity intact. That afternoon, while Charlie was napping and Sophia was playing with her dolls on the living room floor, I sat on the beige sofa Jessica had bought last year, the same one I wasn't allowed to sit on if I was wearing clothes that might stain it. I looked around. The framed photos on the shelves showed Jessica's perfect family, but I wasn't in any of them. On the coffee table were professional photo albums of the children, those expensive sessions Jessica scheduled every 6 months to document their growth. I opened one, hoping to find at least one picture of me with my grandchildren, but page after page, I only saw Jessica, Alex, Charlie, and Sophia posing in perfect gardens, with perfect smiles, in perfect compositions where there was no room for a 66-year-old grandmother with wrinkles and hands stained by years of labor. It was then that I found something that broke my heart into microscopic pieces. On one of the last pages of the album, there was a photo from last Christmas. The whole family was gathered around the tree, opening gifts, laughing. I was in the photo, but I had been cropped out. Literally. You could see half of my arm at the edge of the image, like a photographic error that needed to be eliminated. I closed the album with trembling hands and placed it exactly where I had found it. Sophia looked up at me from the floor and asked in her 3-year-old voice, "Why are you crying, Grandma Carol?" "I'm not crying, sweetie," I lied, quickly wiping away the tears with the sleeve of my sweater. "I just got something in my eye." That evening, when Jessica returned from work and I was getting ready to leave, I asked her with the most casual voice I could manage, "Honey, did you remember that yesterday was my birthday?" She stopped in the middle of the kitchen, a look of genuine panic on her face. "Yesterday? Seriously? Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I had a horrible day at the office. A presentation went wrong and—" "It's okay," I interrupted, because I knew the script by heart. There was always an excuse, always something more important than my existence. "I was just asking. I'll make it up to you this weekend," she promised, giving me a quick hug that smelled of expensive perfume and cheap guilt. "We'll do something special, okay?" But the weekend came and went, and the compensation never materialized. As always, like everything in my relationship with Jessica, promises that evaporated into thin air like smoke, pretty words that didn't translate into real actions. It was that night, walking to the subway station after another day of being invisible in my daughter's house, that something inside me began to change. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany, but more like the sound of something very small breaking in silence, like a dry branch snapping without anyone hearing it fall. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think a sentence that had been buried in the deepest part of my mind for years. Maybe I deserve better than this. The text I received that Tuesday morning wasn't just the trigger for my awakening, but the confirmation of something I had been denying for months. After reading it for the fourth time on the train, I put my phone in my bag and made a decision I never thought I'd make. I wasn't going to Jessica's house that day. For the first time in 5 years, I was going to be absent from my job as the invisible nanny. I got off at the Times Square station and walked aimlessly through the tourist-filled parts of the city I'd never had time to explore, because I was always rushing between my home and my daughter's. I walked into the Met like a stranger in my own city, paying the $30 admission fee with the feeling I was playing hooky. It was a Wednesday morning, and the museum was filled with groups of foreign retirees taking photos and speaking in languages I didn't understand. As I walked through the grand halls, surrounded by massive paintings and ancient artifacts, my phone began to vibrate insistently. Jessica was calling. I took it out of my bag, looked at her name on the screen, and for the first time in my adult life, I declined her call. 5 minutes later, another buzz. A voicemail. "Mom, where are you? The kids are waiting. I have an important meeting and I need to leave now. Call me ASAP." Her voice was irritated, as if my absence were a personal inconvenience designed specifically to ruin her day. I didn't call her back. Instead, I continued walking through the museum galleries, imagining what it would have been like to live in an era where women like me simply didn't exist, where domestic service was invisible by design and not by family neglect. At least those women received a salary for their invisibility. By 2 in the afternoon, my phone had registered 12 missed calls and 8 text messages, each more desperate than the last. "Mom, please answer. Did something happen to you? I'm really worried. The kids are asking for you." It was that last message that hurt the most, because I knew it was a lie. The children were used to me appearing as if by magic every morning, but Jessica had never explained who I was beyond the grandma who watches you. I decided to have lunch by myself at a small Italian restaurant near Central Park, one of those places with red-checked tablecloths and older waiters who reminded me of my father. I ordered lasagna for one, something I'd never done because I always ate leftovers from what I cooked for others, and had a glass of red wine at 3 in the afternoon because no one was waiting for me at home. The waiter, a man in his 70s with working hands and a kind smile, approached my table after I finished eating. "Is everything all right, ma'am? You seem a little lost in thought." I smiled at him, surprised that someone saw me, truly saw me, after months of feeling invisible. "I'm just having a different kind of day," I replied. "Those are the best kinds of days," he said, winking at me. "At my age, you learn to appreciate the surprises." When I finally got to my apartment that night, it was 9:30. Jessica was sitting on the steps of my building, waiting. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup was smeared, and for the first time in years, she looked vulnerable, like the little girl who used to run into my arms when she got hurt at the park. "Mom, you scared me to death," she said, getting up and hugging me with a force I hadn't felt since she was a teenager. "I thought something terrible happened to you. I went to your apartment. I called the hospitals. I even went by the market where you shop to see if anyone had seen you." For a moment, my heart softened. Maybe this scare had made her realize what I meant to her, how much she truly needed me. But then she kept talking. I had to cancel 3 important meetings. Alex had to leave work early to pick up the kids from school. It was total chaos. There it was again. Her concern wasn't for me, but for the inconvenience my absence had caused in her perfectly organized life. She didn't ask why I had disappeared. She didn't apologize for the hurtful message that morning. She was just reprimanding me for disrupting her routine. "Jessica," I said with a calmness that surprised even me, "we need to talk." We went up to my apartment in silence, and for the first time in years, she sat on my sofa like a guest, not like someone who had a right to be there. "Why did you send me that text this morning?" I asked directly, without mincing words, without the maternal gentleness I always use to avoid conflict. "Why is my food a nuisance? Why does my presence make your house dirty?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. like a scolded child. Mom, that's not what I meant. It's just, you have to understand. Alex invited some important clients over for brunch on Sunday, and you know how he is about cleanliness. I didn't want any weird smells in the house. Weird smells? I repeated. Jessica, I cooked the same food you loved as a child. The same food you asked for when you were sick. The food that made you say our home smelled like home. Things change, Mom, she replied with an exasperated sigh, as if I were too old to understand basic concepts. We have a different lifestyle now. You can't just show up with Tupperware of homemade food when we have important people over. It doesn't project the right image. I don't project the right image, I asked, feeling as if I'd been slapped. Me? Your mother? I don't project the right image? It's not personal, she said quickly. But her words were like knives. It's just that, well, you're from a different generation. Alex and I move in circles where presentation matters a lot. His clients expect a certain level of sophistication. I was silent for several minutes, processing what I had just heard. My own daughter, the child I had raised alone, working double shifts and sacrificing every personal comfort, was telling me that I was a social embarrassment, that my presence, my food, my love expressed in the form of homemade lentil stew was incompatible with her new status. You know what, Jessica? I said finally, getting up from the sofa. You're right. Things have changed. And maybe it's time they changed a little more. What do you mean? She asked. And for the first time in the conversation, I detected a hint of real concern in her voice. I mean, maybe it's time you found a real nanny, someone who charges for her services, who has set hours, who doesn't show up with containers of homemade food that might embarrass you in front of your important clients. Jessica's face went pale. Mom, don't be dramatic. You know the kids adore you. You know you're irreplaceable. No, I replied with a clarity that amazed me. I'm convenient. I'm free. I'm invisible when you need me to be, and available when you need me. But I'm not irreplaceable, Jessica. I am replaceable. And I think we've both reached the point where I should be replaced. That night, after Jessica left crying and promising that we would fix things, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and made the first completely selfish decision of my adult life. I was not going to watch my grandchildren for free anymore. I was not going to be the invisible grandmother who appeared when convenient and disappeared when she was in the way. For the first time in decades, I was going to think about what I wanted, what I needed, what I deserved. And the first thing I deserved was respect. The call came 3 days later, on a Saturday morning as I was drinking my coffee and peacefully reading the paper at my small kitchen table. It was Alex, not Jessica. His voice was tense, controlled, with that professional coolness he used when talking business. Carol, we need to talk, he said without preamble, not even a hello. Jessica is very upset about what happened the other day. The kids are asking for you, and frankly, this situation is getting out of hand. Good morning, Alex, I replied deliberately, emphasizing the courtesy he had omitted. How can I help you? Look, I know Jessica may not have expressed herself in the best way, he continued, as if negotiating a problematic contract, but you're blowing things out of proportion. The kids need stability, and you disappearing like that without notice is very confusing for them. I remained silent, waiting for him to get to the real point of his call. Alex wasn't the type to call to mediate family conflicts out of the goodness of his heart. He had an agenda. Besides, he went on, and there it was, we have a very important presentation with Japanese investors on Monday. Jessica needs to focus, and she can't do that if she has to worry about finding a last-minute babysitter. Those things cost a fortune, Carol. We're talking $25 an hour plus extras for the weekend. There was the naked truth. He wasn't calling because the children missed me, or because Jessica had reflected on her hurtful words. He was calling because my absence was costing them money. Money they preferred to spend on their expensive dinners, on Jessica's designer clothes, on the second SUV they had just bought. I understand, I said with a calm that surprised me. $25 an hour sounds like a fair price. There was a silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? I mean that if you need a nanny who costs $25 an hour, I'm available. It's about 50 hours a week. That's $1,250 a week. $5,000 a month. Payable in advance. Carol, you can't be serious, Alex said, and for the first time in 5 years, his voice lost its arrogant confidence. You're the grandmother. It's your duty to help with the kids. My duty? I repeated the word slowly, savoring it. Based on what, exactly? That I'm a woman? That I'm older? That I once had the misfortune of raising a daughter who is now ashamed of my homemade food? Don't twist things, he retorted, but his voice sounded defensive. Jessica isn't ashamed of you. She just wants a more professional atmosphere when she's hosting clients. Then she needs professional employees, I replied. And professional employees get paid for their services. As you just explained to me very clearly, $25 an hour is the market rate. I hung up the phone before he could respond, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. For decades, I had confused motherly love with self-effacement. But that morning, I discovered that I could love my daughter without letting her walk all over me. An hour later, Jessica showed up at my apartment unannounced. She let herself in with the key I had given her years ago, calling my name from the doorway like an angry teenager. Mom, what did you say to Alex? He's furious. I found her in my living room, pacing like a caged lion, with her hair disheveled and her eyes shining with tears of rage. She was wearing workout clothes that cost more than my monthly food budget, and her designer sneakers left marks on my cheap linoleum floor. I told him that if he needs a professional nanny, he can hire me as a professional nanny, I replied, sitting calmly in my armchair. At market rate, as he himself specified. You can't charge me to take care of your own grandchildren, she yelled, her voice breaking on the last word. You're their grandmother. You're supposed to do it for love. For love? I looked her straight in the eye. Jessica, when was the last time you invited me to have dinner at your house? When was the last time you asked me how I'm feeling? If anything hurts? If I need help with anything? When was the last time you treated me like your mother and not like your household staff? She stopped in the middle of the room, as if my questions had physically struck her. That's different. You know I love you, Mom. You know you're important to us. Important? I got up from the armchair and walked to the kitchen, where I had family photos stuck to the refrigerator. Remember this? I said, pointing to a photo from her last family Christmas. It's the same picture you have framed in your living room, except in yours, I'm cropped out. Jessica's face turned red. That was a mistake by the photographer. The picture was framed wrong. No, Jessica, I said sadly. It wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious decision. I'm good enough to watch your kids for free 12 hours a day, but not presentable enough to appear in your family photos. She sat down heavily on my sofa, her hands covering her face. It's not that, Mom. It's complicated. Alex has an image to maintain, and sometimes your mother is an embarrassment. I finished the sentence for her. Sometimes my secondhand clothes and my worn-out hands don't fit in with his social circle of important people. Don't say that, she sobbed. But she didn't contradict me. She couldn't, because she knew it was true. Look, Jessica. I sat down beside her and took her hands, those soft hands that had never known real physical labor. I raised you by myself, working whatever jobs I could to give you everything you needed. I never asked for anything in return because that was my job as a mother. But you're not a child anymore. You're a grown woman with your own family, and if you want my services as a nanny, you're going to pay me like any other nanny. But we're family, she muttered through her tears. Exactly, I replied. We are family. And in a family, everyone respects each other. Everyone contributes in some way. Everyone matters equally. When was the last time I felt respected in your house, Jessica? When was the last time I felt that I mattered to you as a person, not just as a free service? She was quiet for several minutes, crying silently. Finally, she lifted her head and looked at me with those eyes that had been my weakness for 35 years. We don't have $5,000 a month to pay you, Mom, she admitted in a small voice. With the mortgage, the kids' private school, the 2 cars, we're barely making ends meet. Then maybe it's time to reevaluate your priorities, I said gently. Maybe the kids don't need a school that costs more than my annual pension. Maybe you don't need two luxury cars. Maybe they need something simpler but more authentic. You don't understand, she said, her voice hardening again. You can't ask me to lower my standard of living. Not after everything I've worked for to get where I am. And what about everything I worked for so you could get where you are? I asked. Does that count for nothing? She stood up from the sofa, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. This is insane, Mom. You're destroying our family over money. No, Jessica, I replied as I walked her to the door. I'm trying to save what's left of my dignity. And maybe, if you're lucky, I'm trying to teach you that real love isn't free. Real love is nurtured with respect, consideration, and reciprocity. When I closed the door behind her, I leaned against the wood and smiled for the first time in weeks. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for my own worth, and it felt like waking up from a very long, very sad dream. The next 2 days passed in absolute silence. No calls, no texts, no dramatic appearances at my door. It was as if I had ceased to exist for my own daughter, and for the first time in years, that silence didn't hurt me. The reason for it hurt, but the silence itself had become an unexpected gift. On Wednesday morning, while I was watering the plants on my small apartment balcony, I heard a familiar little voice in the hallway. "Does Grandma Carol live here?" Charlie asked, with the crystal clarity of a 5-year-old. My heart raced. I ran to the door and opened it before they could ring the bell. There stood my 2 grandchildren, holding the hand of a young woman I didn't know. Charlie was wearing his school uniform, his tie crooked and his shoes untied. Sophia's eyes were puffy, as if she'd been crying, and she was clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a pink rabbit I had given her last year. "Are you Carol Anderson?" the young woman asked me with a foreign accent, possibly Romanian or Bulgarian. "I'm Ioana, the children's new nanny. Mrs. Jessica asked me to bring them here because they have been very sad. They won't eat, they won't play. They only ask for their Grandma Carol." Charlie let go of Ioana's hand and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs with the desperate force of children who don't understand why adults disappear from their lives without explanation. "Grandma, why don't you come to our house? Are you mad at me?" he asked, his voice breaking. I knelt down to his level and hugged him, breathing in that childlike scent of apple shampoo and cookies that had always been my natural sedative. "No, my love, I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at either of you. Grandma Carol loves you both so much." Sophia approached timidly, still clutching her rabbit. "Mommy says you're very busy," she mumbled in her 3-year-old voice. "But Charlie says grandmas are never too busy for their grandkids." Those words pierced me like arrows. Jessica had lied to them, of course. It was easier to tell them their grandmother was busy than to explain that their mother had decided my love had a price she wasn't willing to pay. I invited the children in, and Ioana explained the situation while Charlie and Sophia settled onto my sofa as if it were the most natural place in the world. "Mrs. Carol, honestly, these children are not doing well," she told me in a low voice, so they couldn't hear. "I've been a nanny for 5 years. I've seen many families, but I've never seen children so attached to their grandmother. They ask for you all day. Charlie won't let anyone else make his breakfast. He says no one makes the star-shaped toast like you. And Sophia cries every night asking for you to come tell her the story of the grandma who cooked clouds." My heart broke into a million pieces. My grandchildren were suffering because of a war that wasn't theirs, victims of their mother's inability to value what she had until it was gone. "And their parents?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ioana sighed. "Mr. Alex works all day. He comes home very late. And Mrs. Jessica, she is always on the phone, always stressed. Yesterday she yelled at Charlie because he spilled milk on the table, and the boy asked me why his mommy never yelled at him when you were there." I spent the next 2 hours with my grandchildren, playing on my living room floor, reading them stories with funny voices, and making them a simple lunch that they devoured as if it were the finest feast in the world. For a moment, I let myself pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still their 24/7 grandma, that my love was still enough to fix any problem. But when it was time for Ioana to take them back, Charlie clung to my neck and began to cry in that inconsolable way that only small children can. "I don't want to go, Grandma Carol. I want to stay with you." At home, nobody hugs me like you do. I had to use all my willpower to gently detach him from my neck and hand him to Ioana. You have to go, my love, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Grandma Carol will always be here when you need me. Promise? He asked, with those big, tear-filled eyes that looked so much like Jessica's when she was little. I promise, I replied, though I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, thinking about my grandchildren's sad faces, about Ioana's words, about Sophia's forced smile when she said goodbye. Had I been too hard on Jessica? Was I punishing my grandchildren for their mother's mistakes? At 3 a.m, I got up and sat at my kitchen table with an old notebook and a pen. I wrote a letter I never thought I would write. Jessica, after the children's visit today, I understand that perhaps I was too drastic. I don't want Charlie and Sophia to suffer because of our adult problems. I am willing to renegotiate, but under new conditions that allow all of us to maintain our dignity. I wrote for an hour, erasing and rewriting, trying to find the exact words that would allow me to be close to my grandchildren without sacrificing the self-respect it had taken me 66 years to find. The next day, before I could send the letter, I received a call that would change everything. It was from Brenda, an old coworker from my office cleaning days, with whom I had maintained a sporadic friendship over the years. Carol, I hope you don't mind me calling, she said, her voice full of excitement. But I just saw something on Facebook that made my blood run cold. Have you seen what your daughter posted? My stomach dropped. I didn't have Facebook. I had never understood social media, but Brenda told me what she had found. Jessica had posted a photo of Ioana with the children in the park, with a caption that read, "So grateful to have found our amazing new nanny. The kids adore her, and she's so professional and responsible. Sometimes changes are exactly what a family needs to grow. Blessed Mama, new beginnings, moving forward." Brenda read every word to me slowly, and with each phrase, I felt like I was being erased from my own family's history. Not only had she unceremoniously replaced me, but she was celebrating it publicly, framing my absence as an improvement in their lives. Carol, are you there? Brenda asked after a long silence. Yes, I answered in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. I'm here. But I was lying. In reality, I had ceased to be anywhere that mattered. My own daughter had erased me from her life so completely that she was already celebrating my replacement on social media, as if I were an old appliance she had finally decided to upgrade. That afternoon, I tore up the letter I had written in the early morning and made a different decision. If Jessica wanted to play the game of public indifference, I was going to teach her what it truly meant to be without her mother. But this time, I was going to do it on my own terms, with my own dignity intact. For the first time in my life, I was going to think of myself before my daughter. And for the first time in decades, that idea didn't fill me with guilt, but with a strange sense of freedom. The first decision I made was to close the bank account where I'd kept my savings for the last 15 years. Not because it was an impressive amount, but because it was mine, completely mine. And for the first time in decades, no one was going to have an opinion on how I spent it. For years, Jessica had looked over my bank statements when she helped me with my taxes, always with comments on my spending. Mom, why do you need to spend so much on prescriptions? There are cheaper generics. Or, I don't understand why you keep shopping at that expensive butcher shop in the neighborhood. As if every dollar I spent on my own well-being was a dollar stolen from her future plans. The bank teller, a young man in his 30s in a crisp suit, looked at me with curiosity when I asked to close the account and withdraw everything in cash. Are you sure, Mrs. Anderson? It's nearly $95,000. It could be better invested or at least kept in a high-yield savings account. I'm completely sure, I answered with a firmness that surprised me. I'd like the money in $50 bills, please. $95,000. It was my entire net worth, my parents' inheritance, years of Social Security checks saved dollar by dollar, some extra sewing jobs I had done in secret at night when Jessica thought I was just watching television. It was a fortune for someone like me, but it was also my independence made real. That afternoon, with the bills tucked safely in my old black leather purse, I took the train out of the city and walked into a real estate agency I had seen advertised in the local paper. "I'm looking for something small," I told the agent. An efficient middle-aged woman who greeted me with the professional smile reserved for modest clients. "A one-bedroom apartment, maybe outside the city, something I can pay for in cash." Her eyes lit up when I mentioned paying in cash. Suddenly, I went from being a bothersome old woman to a serious client. "I have exactly what you need," she said, and began showing me pictures on her computer. "It's a co-op in White Plains, completely renovated, near the Metro North Station, $90,000 ready for closing." The apartment was perfect in its simplicity. A bright room, a small but functional kitchen, a modern bathroom, and most importantly, a small balcony that overlooked a park where other retirees walked their dogs and sat on benches reading the newspaper. It was a place where I could be invisible by choice, not by imposition. "I'll take it," I said without even seeing it in person. And the agent blinked several times as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "Don't you want to see it first? Talk to someone in your family? This is a big decision." "It's my money and my decision," I replied. "Prepare the paperwork." I signed the closing documents 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, in a lawyer's office that smelled of old paper and strong coffee. For the first time in my life, my name appeared alone on a property deed. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, just as Carol Anderson, owner of a small piece of the world that no one could take from me. While I waited for the final paperwork to be processed, I decided to do something I'd been putting off for months: visit my primary care physician. Dr. Evans had known me for 20 years. He'd seen all my aches and pains, and he always spoke to me with that mix of professionalism and paternal affection that put me at ease. "Carol, good to see you," he said when I entered his office. "It's been months since your last checkup. How are you feeling?" "Different," I answered honestly. "Like I've woken up from a very long dream. But also tired, doctor. Very tired." After examining me and running some basic tests, Dr. Evans sat across from me with the serious expression he adopted when he had important news. "Carol, physically you're fine for your age. A little arthritis, slightly high blood pressure, nothing alarming. But I'm concerned about something else." "What's that?" "You seem liberated but also emotionally exhausted. Have you been under any particular stress lately?" I told him everything. I hadn't planned to, but the words just came out. Jessica's hurtful text, years of feeling invisible, the decision to charge for my services, the family rift, the purchase of the apartment. Dr. Evans listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "You know what I think, Carol?" he said when I finished. "I think you've just done something very brave. Setting boundaries at 66 isn't easy, especially with your children, but I also think you need to take care of yourself. Emotional stress affects the body more than we realize." He prescribed some vitamins and gave me something I didn't expect: a referral to a support group for older women that met every Tuesday at a community center near my new neighborhood. "It's not formal therapy," he explained. "It's women your age who get together to talk, to share experiences. Many have gone through similar situations with their families. It might do you good to meet new people." That night, in my empty apartment in Jackson Heights, I packed my few belongings into cardboard boxes I'd gotten from the supermarket. I didn't have much to take: clothes, a few books, the photos Jessica hadn't wanted, basic kitchen utensils. It all fit in the trunk of a taxi. On Saturday morning, I moved into my new life. The apartment in White Plains was everything I had hoped for: small, clean, bright, and completely mine. I placed my few photos on the living room end table, organized my clothes in the built-in closet, and for the first time in decades, I cooked a meal just for myself, without calculating portions for other people. That afternoon, as I drank tea on my new balcony, watching the young families play in the park across the street, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Carol Anderson?" a friendly female voice asked. "This is Marilyn, from the support group Dr. Evans mentioned. He thought you might be interested in joining us next Tuesday. Would you like to chat a bit beforehand?" Marilyn was 72, had raised 4 children alone after being widowed young, and had gone through a similar experience with one of her sons 3 years ago. At first, I thought I would die of sadness, she told me over the phone. But then I discovered something wonderful. When you stop living for others, you start living for yourself. And that, my dear Carol, is a gift that very few women of our generation give ourselves. We talked for an hour, and when we hung up, I realized I had smiled more during that conversation than I had in the last 6 months. There was someone out there who understood exactly what I was feeling. Someone who had survived the process of rebuilding herself after decades of self-effacement. That night, in my new bed, in my new apartment, in my new life, I slept soundly for the first time in months. I didn't wake up wondering if Jessica would need me the next day, didn't mentally plan my grandchildren's meals, didn't check my phone for messages that never came. For the first time in my adult life, the next day belonged completely to me. The following Tuesday, as I was heading to the community center for my first support group meeting, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was from NYU Langone Hospital, with that professional neutral voice nurses use when they have to deliver urgent news. "Are you Carol Anderson, mother of Jessica Miller?" the voice on the other end of the line asked. My heart stopped. "Yes, that's me. What's happened?" "Your daughter is here, in the emergency room. She had a nervous breakdown at her workplace. She's stable, but she's asking for you insistently. She gave your number as her emergency contact." During the 20 minutes it took me to get to the hospital in a cab, my mind oscillated between instinctive maternal panic and a strange sense of bitter irony. After weeks of silence, after publicly celebrating my replacement on social media, Jessica had listed my number as her emergency contact. Even in her most vulnerable moment, some part of her knew I was the only person who would show up. No questions asked. I found her on a gurney in the ER, hooked up to a monitor that beeped with the steady rhythm of her vital signs, which immediately calmed me. Her eyes were closed, her hair was a mess, and for the first time in years, she looked small, fragile, like the little girl who used to seek refuge in my arms after a nightmare. "Mom," she murmured when she sensed my presence, without opening her eyes. "I knew you'd come." I sat in the plastic chair next to her gurney and took her hand, that soft hand that had never known real physical labor, but which was now trembling like an old woman's. "I'm here, honey. What happened?" "Everything is falling apart," she whispered, and tears began to stream down her cheeks without her opening her eyes. "Alex says the cost of the nanny is killing us. The kids cry every night asking for you. Yesterday, Charlie asked me why Grandma Carol doesn't love us anymore, and I didn't know what to tell him." Her voice broke completely on the last sentence, and for a moment, she was my little girl again, the one who came running to me when something hurt her. But this time, the pain that had broken her had my name on it, and that reality weighed on my chest like a stone. "Go on," I said softly, stroking her hand. "This morning, at the office, they asked me to give a presentation to an important client. It was exactly the kind of project I've been waiting for years, the chance to prove I deserve a promotion. But when I stood up to speak, I couldn't. I just couldn't. I just stood there in front of all those people, and the words wouldn't come out." Jessica opened her eyes for the first time and looked directly at me. They were bloodshot, swollen from crying and exhaustion. "Do you know what the only thing I could think about was while I was standing there like an idiot? That you had never once failed me at any important moment in my life. Not once. And I failed you in the cruelest way possible." The doctor who came to check on Jessica, a young man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, explained that she had suffered a severe anxiety attack, likely triggered by accumulated stress. "It's not uncommon at her age," he told me quietly, while Jessica pretended to be asleep. "Women in their 30s trying to maintain demanding careers while raising young children are under enormous pressure. She needs rest, family support, and probably some therapy." Family support. The words echoed in my head as I took Jessica back to her house that afternoon. Alex hadn't shown up at the hospital. He had a meeting he couldn't cancel, as Jessica explained in a voice so empty it broke my heart. When we arrived at the house in Scarsdale, Iwana greeted me at the door with a look of visible relief. "Mrs. Carroll, thank God you're here. The children have been impossible since they heard their mom was in the hospital." They haven't eaten anything, and Charlie has been hiding under his bed, refusing to come out. I went up to the kids' room and found Charlie huddled in the dark space under his bed, clinging to an old photo of the two of us at the park from when he was 3. I lay down on the floor and squeezed under the bed with him, something my 66-year-old back immediately protested. "Hi, sweetie," I said in the dim light. "What are you doing under here?" "Grandma Carol," he sobbed, and threw himself into my arms with the unique desperation of a child who has been holding in fear for too long. "Is Mommy going to die? Are you going to go away too and leave us all alone?" "No, my darling," I whispered, holding him tight while trying to control my own tears. "Mommy is fine. She was just very tired, and I am never going to leave you all alone. Never! Do you hear me?" That night I stayed at the house, sleeping on the living room sofa after putting the children to bed and making sure Jessica took the anxiety medication she'd been prescribed. Alex arrived after 11, smelling of alcohol and offering elaborate excuses about demanding clients and the impossibility of canceling professional commitments. "Carol," he said upon seeing me in the living room, and his voice had a tone I hadn't heard before, something approaching humility. "Thanks for coming. I know things have been complicated lately." "Alex," I replied, getting up from the sofa to face him directly, "your wife had a nervous breakdown today. Your children have been crying for weeks, asking why their grandmother disappeared from their lives. And you come home at 11 at night smelling like whiskey. Do you really think this is fixed with a thanks for coming?" For the first time in the 5 years I had known Alex, I saw him look genuinely ashamed. He sat down heavily in one of his expensive armchairs and covered his face with his hands. "I don't know what to do, Carol. Work is insane. Our expenses are killing us. And Jessica hasn't been the same since you left. Neither have the kids. It's like the whole family just broke and I don't know how to fix it." "The family broke?" I said with a calm that surprised me. "The day you two decided my love was free but my presence was an embarrassment. It broke when my homemade food became an annoying smell to be avoided. It broke when you cropped me out of the family photos like I was a mistake that needed to be corrected." Alex looked up and met my gaze directly for the first time in years. "Jessica told me what she said about the food, and I know I never treated you the way I should have. I thought that because you were always available, always willing to help, I didn't need to thank you or treat you like real family." "Real family?" "Like someone whose opinion mattered. Like someone we should include in our decisions, our plans, our photos," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "Jessica hasn't slept properly in 3 weeks, wondering how to fix this. The kids ask for you constantly, and I've realized I have no idea how to take care of my own family without you." I sat across from him, studying his face for any sign of manipulation or falsehood, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. "Alex," I said finally, "I don't need dramatic apologies or promises you won't keep. What I need is respect. Respect for my time, for my work, for my presence in this family. And if you can't give me that, I'd rather maintain the distance we have now." "What do we have to do?" he asked, and for the first time in 5 years, he seemed to be truly listening to my answer. "You have to decide if you want a grandmother or an employee," I replied, "because I've already decided I'm never going to be both at the same time again." The next morning, I woke up on the sofa in Jessica's house to the familiar smell of my own coffee filling the kitchen. For a confusing moment, I thought I had slipped back into my old routine, that it had all been a strange dream. But when I got up and saw my things still packed in a bag by the door, I remembered I didn't live here anymore. I was just an emergency visitor whose stay had been extended by one night. Jessica came downstairs like a ghost, shuffling her feet, her hair a mess. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself some coffee. The anxiety medication had left her dazed, but at least she had slept. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice so small it reminded me of when she had a fever as a child. "Thanks for staying. How are you feeling?" I asked, studying her pale face. "Like I got hit by a truck," she admitted, sitting heavily at the kitchen table, but also relieved in a weird way, like I finally allowed myself to collapse after years of pretending I had everything under control. Charlie and Sophia appeared in the kitchen in their pajamas, and for the first time in weeks, they ran to me with their genuine, familiar smiles. I hugged them tightly, breathing in their scent of children's shampoo and lazy mornings. But I also noticed something different about them, a new caution, as if they had already learned that important adults could disappear without warning. "Are you going to stay forever, Grandma Carol?" Sophia asked, clinging to my leg. "Not forever, sweetie," I answered honestly. "But I'm going to come visit more often." Jessica looked up from her coffee, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes held a glimmer of hope. "Really? But there'll be visits," I clarified firmly. "Not work. When I come, I'll be their grandmother, not their nanny. I'll play with them, read them stories, cook something nice if I feel like it. But you two will have to manage the rest." "What if we need urgent help?" Jessica asked. "Like yesterday?" "Real emergencies are different," I answered. "But you're going to have to learn the difference between a real emergency and the inconvenience of not having a free nanny." That morning, while Jessica recovered and Alex had left early for work with a promise to be back sooner to seriously discuss changes, I took the kids to the park 3 blocks from the house. It was something I hadn't done in months, just walk with them without a rush, without a strict schedule, without the pressure of keeping them perfectly clean for their parents' return. At the park, while Charlie and Sophia played on the swings, I sat on a bench next to other grandmothers who were also watching their grandchildren. One of them, a woman with white hair and a kind smile, offered me a mint from a crumpled bag. "I haven't seen you here before," she said conversationally. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" "Not exactly," I replied. "It's complicated." She laughed with understanding. "At our age, most family things are complicated. I'm Anne, and those 2 little devils over there are my grandkids." She pointed to 2 children who were building sandcastles with the concentration of professional architects. "I come here every Wednesday and Friday, when their mother works. It's our special time, no schedules or pressure." "You don't watch them every day?" I asked, curious. "Heavens, no!" she exclaimed, laughing. 2 days a week is perfect, enough to maintain the connection, but not so much that they take me for granted. When you're 70, you learn that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Her words resonated in my head for the rest of the morning. Love that didn't have to hurt to be real. For decades, I had confused total sacrifice with motherly love. But maybe there was another way to love that didn't require complete self-annihilation. When we got back to the house, I found Alex waiting for us in the living room. He had come home early, as promised, and had a yellow legal pad full of numbers and calculations on the coffee table. "Carol," he said, after the kids ran upstairs to change, "I've been running the numbers all morning. You're right about everything. We've been living beyond our means, spending money we don't have on things we don't need, and using your generosity to patch the holes in our out-of-control budget." He showed me the calculations. The kids' private school that cost more than my annual Social Security, the 2 car leases that ate up a third of their income, the expensive restaurant dinners, the designer clothes, the vacations they put on credit cards. If we pull the kids out of private school and enroll them in the public school down the street, sell the second car, and cut back on unnecessary expenses, we can afford a nanny 3 days a week, he continued. The other 2 days, Jessica can work from home, or we can ask my mother for occasional help. "And your mother is willing to help?" I asked, surprised. In 5 years of marriage, Alex's mother had visited the children maybe 10 times. "I asked her to come over this afternoon to talk," he admitted. "I recognize it was always easier to depend on you because you were always available and never set conditions. But it wasn't fair, not to you or to the rest of the family." Jessica, who had been listening from the stairs, came down and sat next to her husband. She still looked fragile, but there was something different in her posture, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Mom," she said, taking my hand, "I want you to know I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about feeling invisible, about being treated like an employee, and you're right, completely right." "Go on," I said, because I needed to hear all of it. "When I was a little girl, you were my hero, the strongest woman in the world, who could fix any problem, who always had a solution for everything. But somewhere along the way, When I grew up and got married and had my own kids, I stopped seeing you as that incredible woman and started seeing you as part of the family furniture, someone who was just there, available, with no life of her own. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of understanding, not self-pity. "It's no excuse," she continued, "but I think I was so afraid of not being as good a mother as you were that I preferred to turn you into my employee rather than face the possibility that I might fail as a mother if I didn't have your constant help. And now," I asked her, "now I want to try to be a real mother," she answered with a determination I hadn't seen in her since she was a teenager. "I want my kids to see me as their mother, not as the person who takes care of them until Grandma Carol arrives. And I want you to be their grandmother, not their nanny." Alex nodded. "We've also decided that Sundays are mandatory family days. No work, no phones, no social commitments. Just the four of us, learning how to be a real family." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Not the naive hope that everything would go back to the way it was, but the more mature hope that maybe we could build something better on the ruins of what we had destroyed. "And what is my place in this new family?" I asked them. Jessica and Alex looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them before Jessica answered. "The place you should have always had," she said. "That of the beloved and respected grandmother who comes when she wants, leaves when she wants, and is treated like the valuable part of the family you always were." It was a start. Not a magic solution, not an instant happy ending, but a real start towards something that might work for all of us. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. 3 weeks after that conversation, just as I had started to believe that maybe things could really get better, I received a call that reminded me why I had created distance in the first place. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was eating a quiet breakfast in my White Plains apartment, enjoying the ritual of reading the newspaper without being rushed, when my phone vibrated insistently. "Mom, I need you to come right now," Jessica said without even a hello, her voice carrying that controlled panic she had perfected over years of work crises. "Alex is on a business trip. Ioana called in sick, and I have a super important presentation at 10. It's with the Japanese investors, the one that was canceled last time because of my breakdown. I can't fail again." I was silent for several seconds, feeling as if I'd been punched in the gut. After weeks of promises about change, mutual respect, and new family dynamics, there it was again. The emergency call that wasn't a real emergency, but an expectation that I would drop everything to solve her inconvenience. "Jessica," I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "do you remember the conversation we had 3 weeks ago? About the difference between real emergencies and a lack of planning? Mom, please don't do this now," she pleaded, and I could hear Charlie crying in the background. "The kids need to get to school in an hour. Sophia has a fever and can't go anywhere, and I simply cannot lose this work opportunity. I promise we can talk about whatever you want later, but right now, I need you." "Did you call Alex's mother?" I asked. "She's in Boston visiting my sister-in-law," she answered quickly. "She can't come. Did you try calling any of the moms of Charlie's friends to see if they can take him to school?" "Mom, I don't have time for these questions," she said, her voice starting to rise. "Are you coming or not?" There it was. The ultimatum. The emotional pressure designed to make me feel guilty if I didn't immediately abandon my new life to solve her planning problems. It was the exact same pattern she had repeated for years, wrapped in different words, but with the same underlying expectation that I would always be available when she needed me, regardless of my own circumstances. "No," I said, and the word came out with a clarity that surprised me. "I'm not coming." The silence on the other end of the line was so profound that for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath, as if she were trying to process a response she had never considered possible. "What do you mean, no?" she finally asked, her voice genuinely bewildered. "Mom, this is important. It's my job. It's our family's future. And it's your responsibility," I replied firmly. "Jessica, you're 35 years old. You are an intelligent, educated, resourceful woman. Find a solution that doesn't require me to abandon my life to solve yours." "But you're my mother!" she yelled. And there it was again, the final argument she had used for decades to justify any demand. Mothers are supposed to help their children when they need it. Help, yes, I said, getting up from my table and walking to my apartment window, where I could see other retirees in the building watering the plants on their balconies. But not rescue. Not be the automatic solution for every planning problem. Not be your 24/7 personal insurance policy. I hung up the phone and put it on silent. I knew she would call back, probably several times with escalating urgency and drama, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to respond to emotional manipulation disguised as filial love. For the next 2 hours, my phone buzzed constantly. Texts I didn't read, calls I didn't answer. Finally, around 11 in the morning, curiosity got the better of my resolve, and I checked the messages. Mom, please, pick up. I don't understand why you're punishing me like this. I had to call an emergency nanny agency. It's going to cost me $300 for the day. I hope you're happy. I was late and missed the presentation. And finally, the last message, sent at 10:47 a.m. Message received. I'll never ask for your help again. That last sentence should have filled me with guilt. Should have made me run to my phone to apologize and offer to fix everything. But instead, I felt strangely liberated. I had finally set a real boundary and held it, despite the emotional pressure and the practical consequences. That afternoon, I decided to do something I'd been putting off. I went to the support group for older women that Dr. Evans had recommended. The community center was a modest but cozy building, with chairs arranged in a circle and a table with coffee and what looked like homemade cookies. Marilyn, the woman who had called me weeks ago, greeted me with a warm hug and introduced me to the rest of the group, 8 women between 60 and 75, all with similar stories of adult children who had mistaken motherly love for free servitude. Carol just took a very important step, Marilyn told the group after I recounted what had happened that morning. She said no for the first time. Does anyone want to share how they felt the first time they set a boundary with their children? Teresa, an elegant woman of 70, raised her hand. Like I was betraying everything I'd ever been taught about being a mother, she admitted. My daughter called me a monster when I refused to watch my grandkids during her vacation to Paris. She said she'd raised a selfish mother. And what happened next? I asked. At first, it was awful, Teresa acknowledged. 3 months of silence. But then, when she realized I wasn't going to give in to emotional blackmail, she started treating me differently. Now we have a more balanced relationship. I watch my grandkids 2 afternoons a week, and she pays for a sitter when she needs extra help. Patricia, another group member, nodded vigorously. The guilt is the worst part, she told us. We were taught that good mothers sacrifice everything for their children, no matter how old they are. But nobody taught us that we also have a right to be treated with respect and consideration. For the 2 hours the meeting lasted, I listened to stories that could have been variations of my own. Adult children who expected their mothers to be free nannies, personal drivers, interest-free banks, and 24/7 emotional therapists. Women who had lost their identities in the process of raising children who now saw them as resources instead of people. But I also heard stories of recovery, of women who had managed to redefine their family relationships without losing their children's love. It wasn't easy, they all told me, and it didn't always work. Some had lost contact permanently with children who couldn't accept the new boundaries. But those who had persisted had found something they had lost decades ago. Their own dignity. True love, Marilyn told me as we had coffee after the meeting, doesn't require you to completely erase yourself. If your daughter really loves you, she will learn to respect you. And if she can't, then maybe it's time to ask yourself if what you have with her is love or dependency in disguise. That night, in my quiet apartment, I reflected on Marilyn's words. Did I truly love Jessica, or had I confused love with the need to feel needed? Had I raised an independent, capable daughter, or had I created a grown woman who expected others to solve her problems? And more importantly, could I afford to find out the answers to those questions, even if it meant risking the relationship that had defined my life for 35 years? For the first time, the answer seemed clear. Yes, I could. And I had to, not just for myself, but for my grandchildren, who deserved to see their grandmother as a woman with her own dignity, not as the family's domestic staff.